The spreadsheet says you should never pay off your mortgage early. The math looks incredibly simple on paper. If your mortgage is locked in at 4% and the stock market averages 8%, paying off your house early means you are throwing away a free 4% spread. It is treated as the unbreakable golden rule of modern personal finance. But there is a massive flaw in that sterile mathematical model, and it is quietly trapping millions of smart people in jobs they absolutely hate. Today, we are going to look at why being completely debt-free actually feels significantly richer and mathematically performs better during economic shocks than having a massive net worth built entirely on leverage. Because here is the harsh reality that your spreadsheet completely ignores. Reality is not a perfectly controlled experiment. Net worth is often just a vanity metric used to keep score at dinner parties. Cash flow, on the other hand, is sheer survival. And if your survival requires a massive monthly income just to service the debt on your assets, you are not truly rich. You are incredibly fragile. I have noticed over the years that the smartest people in the room are often the ones who fall the hardest for this specific trap. Before we break down the brutal math of exactly how a seemingly harmless arbitrage strategy can bankrupt you during a recession, let me just mention one thing. If you find these deep dives into the mechanics of money helpful, taking a second to hit subscribe is the best return on investment you can get for your time today. It costs nothing and helps the channel grow. The problem with highly intelligent people is that they tend to optimize their lives to the absolute last decimal point. They build these beautiful deterministic models on their laptops, but in doing so, they completely forget to calculate the biological tax of carrying debt. They forget that humans are not algorithms. We feel stress. We feel the pressure of an impending layoff. And when you carry massive liabilities, you pay a hidden nervous system tax every single day, whether you consciously realize it or not. We are going to compare the mathematical optimization of leverage with the behavioral freedom of living without it. We will look at mortgage payoffs, credit cards, cash buffers, and most importantly, your ultimate risk capacity. Because optimizing for wealth does not mean much if you destroy your peace of mind in the process. To really understand this, we have to rewind a bit and figure out how we got so utterly obsessed with leverage in the first place. How did an entire generation of investors become convinced that carrying hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt was a sign of financial sophistication? It did not happen overnight. We were conditioned by a very specific set of economic circumstances that many people falsely assumed would last forever. The prevailing financial dogma of the 21st century dictates that avoiding debt is basically financially illiterate. The standard optimization model suggests you utilize good debt, like mortgages or low-interest business loans, as leverage to acquire appreciating assets. But the foundation of that standard advice is built on shifting sand. Let us look at exactly when and why that sand started to shift. The conventional wisdom states that you should maximize your net worth by keeping all your liquid capital in equities, rather than sinking it into illiquid debt reduction. Why pay off a 4% liability when the market can give you 8%? It sounds flawless, but this mentality was heavily calcified during a very specific historical window. Between 2009 and 2021, we lived through the era of zero interest rate policy. For over a decade, capital was effectively free. If you wanted to borrow money, banks practically begged you to take it. Because money was so insanely cheap, asset prices inflated massively across the board. The stock market exhibited anomalously low volatility coupled with incredibly high compounding returns. It was a golden age for the spreadsheet optimizers, but it created bad habits. Most people stop right here and lose 50 grand in their financial planning. They assume the future will look exactly like the recent past. Average Americans and massive institutional investors alike were conditioned in a highly anomalous macroeconomic environment. We all started to believe that massive leverage was a dominant, consequence-free strategy. Society began to view gross net worth as the ultimate metric of success. But in doing so, we completely ignored the underlying fragility of the cash flow required to sustain the massive liabilities sitting on the other side of the balance sheet. The spreadsheet assumes your life is a perfectly controlled experiment, where inflation is low, job security is absolute, and markets only go up. But the sterile laboratory of zero interest rates no longer exists. The real world is stochastic, meaning it is randomly determined. Think about a high net worth built on leverage, like a massive cargo ship. It looks incredibly impressive on paper. It has massive gross tonnage and commands attention. But a cargo ship requires extremely deep water to operate safely. It turns incredibly slowly, and it is highly susceptible to being destroyed by sudden, unexpected storms. Being debt-free, on the other hand, is like driving a speedboat. It has far less total mass, but its shallow draft allows it to pivot instantly. It can easily navigate the shallow waters of an economic recession and outmaneuver macroeconomic shocks that would sink the cargo ship. The cargo ship relies entirely on a calm, predictable ocean. And as we transition into a new economic reality, calm oceans are the absolute last thing you should be betting your financial survival on. So what happens when the ocean stops being calm? The conventional spreadsheet assumes a sterile environment where market returns are linear and taxes are virtually negligible. But when we introduce realistic, modern macroeconomic variables into the equation, the entire leverage argument starts to fall apart. We have to account for sticky inflation that refuses to drop. We have to factor in elevated borrowing costs that make refinancing a nightmare. And we absolutely must calculate the heavy drag of taxes on our investment gains. When you put all these real-world variables into the formula, that magical arbitrage spread that everyone talks about collapses very quickly. Let us get away from the theory and look at a hard, step-by-step mathematical comparison. I have run these numbers extensively, and the results usually shock people who worship the leverage model. Let us establish our baseline realistic variables. We will assume the S&P 500 gives an expected nominal return of 7.5%. We will factor in a long-term capital gains tax rate of 20%, blending federal and average state taxes. We will assume you have an existing mortgage rate of 4.5% and an ongoing inflation drag of 2.8%. Now, imagine you have a $300,000 lump sum. Do you invest it in the market to capture the spread, or do you use it to completely pay off a $300,000 mortgage at 4.5%? Let us look at scenario A, which I call the leverage trap. You decide to invest the $300,000 and keep the mortgage debt. In scenario A, your nominal market return on that $300,000 at 7.5% is $22,500 a year. On paper, that looks fantastic. But you do not get to keep all of that money. That gain is subject to future capital gains tax. Once we apply that 20% tax drag, your post-tax real capture drops to $18,000. Meanwhile, you are still paying 4.5% interest on your massive $300,000 mortgage. That debt is costing you $13,500 a year in interest. So, let us calculate your actual net profit. You take your $18,000 post-tax gain, subtract the $13,500 debt cost, and you are left with exactly $4,500. If you think risking your home for a tiny 1.5% profit is a bad idea, wait until you see the hidden fee that no one talks about. But first, let us look at scenario B. If you simply pay off the mortgage, you instantly erase that $13,500 debt cost. That is a guaranteed, entirely tax-free return. To guarantee a post-tax return of that exact size in the open market, you would need to find a risk-free instrument yielding roughly 5.6% pre-tax. And let me be clear, there is no risk-free instrument paying that right now. But the real trap of scenario A is something called volatility drag. The $4,500 profit we calculated assumes that the market gives you a perfectly linear return. Markets do not yield 7.5% smoothly. They yield plus 20% one year and minus 15% the next. This introduces massive sequence of returns risk. If a recession hits in year 1 and your portfolio drops 20%, your $300,000 investment is suddenly only worth $240,000. But your debt does not shrink. Your mortgage remains a static $300,000. You are now structurally underwater, yet your monthly cash flow requirement remains artificially high to service that debt. You would never take out a personal loan at 7% just to buy stocks on margin because the broker could issue a margin call. Yet, keeping a massive mortgage to invest in the market is precisely the same mathematical position. A job loss is your life's margin call. Consider two individuals to see why cash flow is the only metric of wealth that actually matters. Person A is highly leveraged. They have a massive $2 million in assets, but $1 million in debt. Their monthly debt service is $7,000. To survive, factoring in taxes, Person A needs a gross baseline income of $140,000 a year. Person B is entirely debt-free. They have $1 million in paid-off assets and zero debt. Their monthly baseline survival cost is just $2,500. Person B only requires a gross baseline income of $40,000 a year. Person A has the same net worth but requires 3.5 times more income just to prevent total bankruptcy. Person A is fragile. Person B is anti-fragile. Why do incredibly intelligent people choose Person A's lifestyle for a marginal 1.5% premium, willingly exposing themselves to catastrophic ruin? It all comes down to behavioral economics. First, there is the sunk cost of human capital, which I like to call the Peter Principle of lifestyle. As people earn more money in their careers, they invariably upgrade their lifestyle using debt. They buy the bigger house and the nicer cars, anchoring their permanent liabilities to their absolute peak earning capacity. They lock themselves into an unbelievably high monthly burn rate. They also suffer from the illusion of uncorrelated variables. The spreadsheet assumes your job and the stock market are completely independent variables. But in the real world, they are deeply correlated. When the market drops 20%, that same macroeconomic shock usually triggers massive corporate layoffs. Leverage multiplies the impact of this dual shock. It often forces you to liquidate your assets at the exact bottom of the market just to cover your monthly debt service. This creates a vicious dopamine debt loop. Leverage allows consumers to consume their future in the present. Taking out a loan to buy a new car spikes your dopamine, but it leaves behind an allostatic load, which is a chronic biological stress response. Debt is exactly like a bloatware application running in the background of your computer's operating system. You might not actively see it on the screen, but it is constantly draining your processing power and your battery life. The mental energy spent worrying about making the next massive payment is cognitive load that you could have spent building a business or improving your actual skills. We will get to the exact barbell portfolio allocation you need in a minute. But first, we need to fix the biggest leak in your career strategy. The most unpriced risk in personal finance is the destruction of your risk capacity. If you require $12,000 a month just to service your leveraged lifestyle, you lose your options. You cannot quit a toxic job to protect your mental health. You cannot take a pay cut to join a high-growth startup with massive equity upside. You suffer from the loyalty tax. Employers implicitly understand when an employee is leveraged. They call them the golden handcuffs. A debt-free employee negotiates from a position of walk-away money, commanding higher structural respect and better compensation because they do not desperately need the paycheck. The spreadsheet completely ignores this leverage. To solve this deep conflict between mathematical optimization and behavioral freedom, we have to abandon the binary debate of whether debt is good or bad. Instead, we must apply a systematic, quantitative framework. Protocol 1 is the fixed income proxy swap. You have to stop viewing debt payoff as a lost investment opportunity. Instead, view it as the fixed income or bond allocation of your overall portfolio. If your target asset allocation is normally 80% equities and 20% bonds, take that entire 20% bond allocation and redirect it toward paying off your mortgage. The logic is simple. A mortgage payoff yields a guaranteed tax-free return of around 4 to 7%. There is absolutely no bond on earth that offers that risk-adjusted yield right now. It is the safest return on capital available. Protocol 2 is calculating your agility index. You need to start optimizing for time, not just dollars. The equation is your liquid assets divided by your minimum monthly burn rate. This gives you your months to ruin. By paying off debt, you drastically slash that denominator. If you have $100,000 liquid and your burn rate drops from 8,000 to 3,000 by eliminating debt, your agility index jumps from 12.5 months to over 33 months. You have mathematically tripled your survival timeline without earning an extra dime. And if you are wondering how to easily track this, that is exactly why we built Cash Class. Cash Class is the official Tom Talks Money web app. It bridges the gap between learning this math and actually doing it. There are absolutely no invasive bank logins required. You just securely upload your CSV statements. It even comes with a free Budgeting 101 course. You can start your 14-day free trial on the web by clicking the link at the very top of the description. Protocol 3 is utilizing the Risk-Adjusted Return on Sleep spread, or RAROS. This is a hard boundary you set for yourself. The rule is simple. Do not hold any debt unless the post-tax inflation-adjusted spread is strictly greater than 300 basis points, or 3%. If your mortgage is at 3% and your conservatively modelled post-tax market return is 6%, the spread is exactly 3%. In the real world, that is basically a mathematical coin toss once the risk of a market downturn is factored in. Pay off the debt. You immediately eliminate the tail risk of ruin and reclaim your cognitive bandwidth. You can then redirect that mental energy into increasing your primary income stream, which yields a much higher return than chasing a tiny arbitrage spread. Protocol 4 is the Barbell Liquidity Strategy. This is the optimal state for our current economic environment. On one side of the barbell, you have zero non-mortgage debt and a hyperliquid cash buffer of 12 to 18 months of your newly reduced baseline living expenses. On the exact opposite end of the barbell, you have an aggressively invested equity portfolio, mostly in low-cost index funds. This barbell setup makes you practically impervious to sequence of returns risk, labour market shocks, and high interest rate environments. If you want to dive even deeper into advanced strategies like the barbell method, click the join button below the video to become one of the optimizers. It is our channel membership where you get custom sketch badges and priority replies from me directly in the comments section. This is where conventional wisdom says you should hold on to your cash to feel safe. I am actually going to tell you to aggressively spend it on crushing your debt. Here is the counterintuitive flip. Hoarding cash while carrying expensive liabilities gives you a false sense of security. Having $50,000 in the bank feels great, right up until you realize your monthly debt obligations are bleeding you dry. By deploying that cash to eliminate the debt, your bank balance drops, but your monthly required cash flow plummets. You are trading an illusion of wealth for actual, unshakable, structural resilience. It is a paradigm shift in how we view money. We have to stop seeing capital merely as a tool to accumulate more numbers on a screen and start seeing it as a tool to buy back our independence. Everything we have discussed today essentially boils down to a concept called the Kelly criterion. This is a mathematical formula heavily used by professional investors and risk managers to size their bets appropriately. The core underlying rule of the Kelly criterion is that in order to maximize your wealth over the long term, you must absolutely avoid the risk of ruin. You can never allow your portfolio or your personal finances to go to zero. Highly leveraged individuals violate this rule every single day. They are risking total, catastrophic ruin just for fractional arbitrage gains. They are picking up pennies in front of a steamroller. The spreadsheet might assure them they are winning mathematically. Right up until the very moment the market drops, they lose their job, and the steamroller completely flattens their entire financial life. Ultimately, being debt-free is not about being overly conservative or being afraid of the stock market. It is about building a foundation so unbelievably strong that market volatility becomes a massive opportunity for you rather than a terrifying threat. When you have absolutely zero debt, a stock market crash is just a fire sale on high-quality assets. It is not a threat to your basic shelter or your family's survival. Remember the bloatware analogy. By paying off your liabilities, you are deleting the background software that is constantly draining your energy. You instantly restore your mental system performance. You are no longer trading your life on margin. You are taking back control of your time, your career choices, and your peace of mind, all of which are worth infinitely more than a theoretical 1% spread. I would love to get some peer review on this data from all of you watching. Do you agree that the mental peace and structural safety of being completely debt-free heavily outweighs the mathematical spread of leverage? Or do you think the spreadsheet still wins out in the end? Drop down and let me know your agility index, or just share your thoughts in the comments below. I treat the comments section like a data gathering lab, and I always read through them to see how these macroeconomic theories hold up in your actual, day-to-day, real lives. It helps refine the models we build for the future. Thank you as always for trusting me with your time today. Stay resilient, keep optimizing your systems, and I will see you in the next one.